Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. AMD's RX 550 $79 graphics card. What is this? Why should you watch and why should you care? This is a new entry-level graphics card from AMD, but with top-level features, HDMI 2.0 support, high dynamic range support, and other new technologies of their latest and greatest graphics cards, but at a budget price. Now, you should watch this video if you are looking for a graphics card for a home theater PC, if you are looking for content creation acceleration, Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Premiere, that sort of thing, or you are looking for a basic graphics card that will accelerate casual games and esports games. Dota 2, League of Legends, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, Overwatch, World of Tanks. Those games will actually play at 1080p really nicely on this graphics card. You don't have to spend hundreds of dollars. Now let me be clear, if you want to play Battlefield 1, Rise of the Tomb Raider, Ghost Recon Wildlands, yes, you do have to spend more than this. But for $79, which is the opening starting price of this graphics card with 2 gigabytes of GDDR5 RAM, this is a compelling deal for somebody who just has a need for a basic graphics card. Now, it is a little bit more expensive than the previous low-price cards I've covered in the past, such as the NVIDIA GT 730 and AMD's own R7 240. Good cards in their own right at about the $50 price range. Is this worth $30 more? Yes. A couple of reasons. First, HDMI 2.0 support, DisplayPort 1.4 support, high dynamic range, relive support for recording and streaming your games. Yes, even if you have a relatively modest basic PC with, say, an i5 processor, this will record and stream your gameplay to Twitch if that's something you're interested in doing. It also supports Radeon Chill, which will allow it to scale itself down and become very power efficient. It's already very power efficient. It'll get even more so. And it has some other technologies that are not present in the 2 to 5 year old cards that traditionally occupy the $50 to $70 price space. First, I want to talk about home theater PCs. Now, this card is primarily aimed at 4K televisions. It will work perfectly on 1080p televisions, but it's generally not necessary. The $30 to $50 cards will handle 1080p definition just fine, and in fact, integrated graphics for the past several years will also do 1080p just fine. None of them will do 4K properly. This has HDMI 2.0, which is very important to get 4K at 60 Hz refresh rate. It also has hardware decode and playback for high efficiency video codec, the H.265, the new standard for 4K video. The older standard was called H.264, and the $30 to $50 cards will decode that. Integrated graphics for the past several years will decode H.264, but not H.265, which this card will. In fact, this is the least expensive card on the market today that will do that. In addition to that, it has high dynamic range support. Now, not very many televisions yet support HDR, but they are coming. Some already do, and frankly, by this time next year, I would fully expect that the majority of TVs do support it. What's HDR? If you're not familiar, it essentially adds color depth to existing images. Traditional television, both 4K, 1080p, and even the old standard, had a relatively limited color depth. The richness of the blacks, the richness and vibrancy of colors was relatively limited compared to the real world. HDR, or high dynamic range televisions, have 2 additional bits of color depth, and they render a much crisper, a much more detailed image that doesn't tend to suffer from color banding and shades of gray, especially in darker scenes. Think Game of Thrones or The Hobbit, or movies such as that will look much better in HDR format. Very new technology, but you have support for that in this card. Finally, an important thing for home theater PCs is the availability of low profile and thin low power cards. Now, this is not a low profile card I have in front of me. This is sort of the deluxe model. This is what I was sent to review. This one has 4 gigabytes of video RAM on it. You don't need 4 gigabytes of video RAM for a card such as this. I strongly suggest that you buy the 2 gigabyte version of it. But you'll be able to get half height, low profile, and short cards to be installed into small form factor PCs for your home theater system. It is a very nice card that I consider to be the perfect replacement for an older GT 710 or 730 from NVIDIA, or an R7 240 or 250 from AMD if you're interested in something that will drive a 4K television or monitor. Next up, I'd like to talk about content creation briefly. Now, first of all, this is not meant towards full-time content creators who make a dedicated living at their craft. You should have something fancier than this graphics card. But for everyone else, including casual part-time YouTubers who like to work in video editing software, you definitely need a graphics card, but you don't have to spend a lot of money. Why? The OpenGL support that is on this card will dramatically accelerate Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Premiere Pro edits, cuts, and transitions, titles, cross dissolves, morphs, color correction, and other effects in both programs can be up to 10 times faster on a graphics card than just done on your CPU. But here's the interesting thing. They don't double in speed again if you get a much faster graphics card. The performance difference in, say, Adobe Photoshop or Premiere Pro in effects and transitions between the RX 550 and the RX 580 is very, very small, not even double. Whereas compared to a CPU alone, you're looking at up to 10 times the performance. Now, Linus Tech Tips did about a year ago a much more extensive look at this than I plan to, and I'm going to link to his video in the description below if you're interested in seeing some more details. He tested a dozen different graphics cards doing Adobe Premiere Pro rendering tests as opposed to a CPU only. And he essentially found the same thing. Putting in a graphics card dramatically speeds up the performance. Getting the most graphics card you can possibly buy, it's faster, but not that much faster. It's not worth the money. Now, after I watched his video, I tried it myself. I use Adobe Premiere Pro for my YouTube video editing, so I tried a GTX 960, and then I rendered the same video again with a 1070, a much more expensive and powerful graphics card. The difference was about 1 or 2%. It was extremely minor. And that was in a video that had morphs, cuts, transitions, cross dissolves, and a lot of titles on it. So it wasn't just a straight video transcode. If you just need a graphics card to accelerate programs that support OpenGL, which is what this uses, then this card will provide you with 80% of the benefit for a very reasonable cost. The only point I wish to make absolutely clear is whatever program you use to edit images and video must support OpenGL acceleration. If it is by chance CUDA core only acceleration, you'd have to have an NVIDIA card for that benefit. Now, Adobe products will use either, and they basically provide very similar performance, either CUDA acceleration or OpenGL. It's just a different standard from each company. Finally, that leads us to gaming. But before we get into gaming, I want to talk about two technologies exclusive to the AMD RX line. The first is Relive and the second is Chill. Now, these are built into the Crimson drivers, which were launched at the end of 2016, and I have used both and find them to be very beneficial. First up is Relive. Relive is AMD software that will let you either record your gameplay or live stream it to sites such as Twitch. It works very well, and yes, if you play League of Legends, Dota 2, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, etc. on this card, it will stream your game at 60 frames per second with virtually no loss of performance of your actual machine. Even if you have a several-year-old i5 4-core processor, it will still do it just fine. Now, one of the questions that was asked in the comment section beneath the 500 series launch video in general is, wait a minute, didn't AMD just launch the Ryzen 7 8-core CPU and they talked about how great that was for video streaming? Yes, that's for professional streamers, Twitch partners who make a living at streaming. Software encoding is better quality. Hardware encoding, which is what Relive is not as high quality as software encoding using H.264 on your CPU. That being said, are you making money streaming or just having fun with it? Over 2 million people a month live stream to Twitch. Fewer than 50,000 of them actually make any money at it. So if you're just doing it casually for fun, you don't need anything but the Relive software and hardware-based encoding on a basic 4-core machine to stream just fine. Are you a Twitch partner? Do you make a living at streaming? Yeah, you need an 8-core processor. You need to do that properly. This is not for professional streamers, but if you're a casual streamer or just like recording your gameplay, it works perfectly. I have used it. I recommend it without any reservations whatsoever. So that's Relive. What about Chill? Chill is an interesting technology which both improves the response time of the game as well as reducing power consumption and temperature. Now, Chill has to be supported by specific software, but not to worry. Counter-Strike Global Offensive, League of Legends, Dota 2, all the important popular games that are commonly streamed to Twitch are supported. More are being added all the time. Here's what's cool about it. When not a lot is going on the screen, the software will lower your frame rate, lowering your power consumption. When you need more frame rate, it will crank up the clock speed and crank up the frame rate for the heavy, intense action sequences. Because it's supported by the games talk to the software and let it know when it needs performance. This is why it doesn't work necessarily in every title. But you can reduce power consumption by a dramatic amount, a third or more. But you can also improve the response time of games because the game and the software driver talk to each other. So if you want less input lag, better response from the game, the Chill software built into the Crimson driver actually can provide a better experience than when it's disabled. By all means, give it a try. Don't assume that you're going to get a worse experience just because you get lower power consumption, less heat generated, and better response time. That's a win-win-win. What a deal. Now, I have mentioned a number of games in this video so far. Counter-Strike Global Offensive, League of Legends, Dota 2, but other games will also play just fine on this card. Generally anything 3 or 4 years or older. So for example, the latest and greatest Call of Duty Infinite Warfare will not play on this. However, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 will. So games that came out a few years ago will all generally play just fine on a basic card such as this because it has similar performance levels to what was mid-range just a few years ago. Now finally, I will mention one other thing. The RX 550 is 50% of the performance of the RX 560. Now I covered the RX 560 briefly in the previous video. I will cover it extensively when it launches in May. If you really want to play games such as Grand Theft Auto 5, Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, you at least need a 560, not a 550. For AAA gaming titles, that's the entry-level point. This is strictly casual and esports gaming, or older titles. That being said, let me tell you a beautiful feature of this card. Not only does this card have no 6-pin PCI-Express power connector, so it will install in virtually any computer, it also has a low enough power draw through the PCI-Express slot that it also works in many pre-builts and older pre-builts that I've had trouble with the RX 460 in. The 5-year-old Dell Optiplex pre-builts and the HP pre-builts that I've previously tested had trouble with the RX 460 because they try to draw up to 75 watts through the PCI-Express slot and some of them don't work. I have installed this exact card in several pre-builts, including a 10-year-old Core 2 quad. It has worked perfectly in every machine I've installed. Not just the Core 2 quad, but also the i5 2400 Dell Optiplexes, which the higher-end cards sometimes don't work in. So if you need a basic gaming card for Overwatch, League of Legends, or 3 to 5-year-old games, and you have a 5-year-old pre-built machine, take a look at this for ultimate compatibility with those older machines. All right, that's enough talking. Let me bring it full screen and show you the 3 games that I tested and compare it on that Acer Aspire T. First up, we have World of Tanks. The first gameplay video I'm going to show you is using the integrated graphics on the Intel i5 7400 CPU. This is the HD 630 graphics chip. Now I'm going to show you 3 different runs. I'm going to show you 1 on the integrated graphics and then 2 on the RX 550 at 2 different detail levels. First things first. The green numbers in the upper left-hand corner of the screen are from MSI Afterburner, a free program you can download and run on your own machine. It will give you real-time numbers as to how your computer is performing graphics, memory, CPU, etc. Next, we used Fraps to get the minimum, maximum, and average game performance numbers that you will see at the end of this video. I did not, however, use Fraps to record the video you're watching, nor did I use the Relive software because it wouldn't work with the HD 630. Instead, I'm using the Elgato HD60S external capture card. This is actually a new capture card I'm using, and this is one of the first times that I am using it. It is a little bit different than the HD60 Pro I've used in the past, but it has the same net effect. Zero performance impact on the machine for having used it. The only difference is this is external using USB-C connectors rather than being an internal PCI Express card. But the short and sweet version is there's no performance loss from having recorded this video. In fact, the machine doesn't even know it's being recorded. The HDMI out from the computer goes to the Elgato HD60S capture card, and then an HDMI cable from it goes to the monitor, so the computer doesn't even know it's there. The USB 3 cable from the Elgato card goes to a separate computer which is actually running the recording software. So again, no performance impact from having recorded this. Now we are running at 1080p resolution at low detail preset. I showed the settings at the beginning of this just rather than telling you, you can actually see it. And to be clear, we are running on the HD client. Now there's two World of Tanks client, the original standard def client and then the high definition client. We are running on the high definition client, and that was a terrible shot. I can't believe I missed that tank. In any case, our frame rate's excellent. This is integrated graphics, and this just goes to show that you can in fact play lots of games on integrated graphics. In fact, AMD, in full fairness, goes out of their way to mention Dota 2 rather than League of Legends, because the reality is League of Legends plays fine on integrated graphics. But if you want to stream or record League of Legends, you either need a hardware capture card such as I'm using here, or this RX 550, which would do a perfect job of it while giving you hundreds of frames per second of perfection of performance. Now the percentage in the top line is how much of the integrated graphics chip we're using, which is basically all of it. The VRAM line, it doesn't have a number there because there's no actual dedicated video memory on integrated graphics. This integrated graphics is using shared main system RAM. Now that's not a problem here, but I would like to point out that this machine has been upgraded with 16 gigabytes of RAM. An argument can be made that I should have pulled one of the memory sticks out, and the reason for that is the RAM is operating in dual channel mode. The 16 gigs is making exactly zero difference to performance here. You don't need 16 gigabytes of RAM to play World of Tanks and League of Legends and stuff like that. But the memory is operating in dual channel mode, which makes it twice as fast in terms of transfer rate. For integrated graphics, that does matter. Now, once the RX 550 is in, it makes no difference whatsoever. So please note that if you buy this machine and you use the integrated graphics without installing an extra 8 gigs of RAM, it will perform a little bit slower than this because you don't have dual channel RAM, and the integrated graphics uses your main system RAM as VRAM. Now if you look at the third line, you will see the i5 7400 CPU. We're using just under half of it. This is a 4-core 4-thread chip, which means World of Tanks needs 2 cores. What this also means is that if you had an i3 or even a Pentium, such as a Pentium G4400 or G4560, you'd get exactly the same performance in all respects, no issues, and the temperature is very, very cool. You can see we're using 3.5 gigs of our main system RAM. Look at that, we're at 107 frames per second on integrated graphics. How awesome is that? Now for those of you interested, I'm not going to show you in this video, World of Warships is also made by the same company that makes World of Tanks, but it's far more graphic demanding because I guess it's newer and not as well optimized. It should be, but it isn't. World of Warships will not play on integrated graphics very well, and I only make that point so that you know that while this game plays perfectly on integrated graphics, many don't, but I can tell you the RX 550 does play World of Warships just fine. I did play some other games, but I'm not going to show them all to you, otherwise this video would be monstrously long. It's going to be long as it is. However, I wanted to include actual live gameplay in here. I could just put the charts in, and this video would be less than 20 minutes long if I did that. But charts don't tell the tale. Charts don't really tell you what to expect. Now, if you're watching this video in 1080p or less, YouTube compresses the heck out of 1080p. While this is 1080p gameplay, I'm actually going to upscale it when I render it to 4K. Why? YouTube gives it better bitrate so you can see the quality difference between low and high. Now, I talked right through the transition between the integrated graphics and the RX 550. If you look up at the top, you'll see we have many more numbers to work with now. Our RX 550 is up there, and we are using hardly any of its graphics performance because we are still at low detail preset. I'm going to show you high here in a minute. That'll be very different. You can see the graphics card temperature is at 50 degrees Celsius. and the clock speed is just under 1.2 gigahertz. Now let me make one point very clear here. The only reason I'm showing you low detail is so you can have a direct point-by-point comparison between the integrated graphics and the RX 550. I don't expect anybody to play this game at low detail if you go out and spend $79 on a very nice graphics card. Instead, and that tank got in my way, I was going to kill that guy. So I am going to show you high here in a second, and the whole point is simply to show you the difference between low and high. Now, medium will not play on integrated graphics. Some setting, some change in there just kills it. So low is the absolute best you can play World of Tanks at. If you set it on the HD 630, yes, I've tried it, to medium, it's 10 frames per second, completely unplayable in all respects. Whereas high detail is surprisingly playable on a $79 graphics card. Alright, you get the point of low. Let's transition to high detail and you can see the difference. Now I'm showing you the settings here. Yes, we're on high detail. Yes, we're at 1080p. Now, I don't have every detail cranked to the max, although it would play, but you would suffer a substantial frame rate drop. If you want to play World of Tanks at maximum detail with everything cranked up and anti-aliasing turned on, you would need an RX 460 or 560. Either would be fine. I didn't mention it earlier. I figured I'd talk about that in more detail during the gameplay. The RX 460 is about 70% faster than the RX 550. The 560 is double the performance. The RX 460 and 560 do have a reasonable performance difference between them because their shader and compute count is different. On the higher end cards, the 470 and 570, and then the 480 and 580, the shader counts are identical. Clock speeds are different, but the shader counts are identical. But the RX 560 has all 16 compute cores unlocked, so it actually has more shaders than the 460 does. That being said, on the day I filmed this video, to be honest with you, the RX 460s, after mail-in rebate, can be found for $79. Now, having said that, I never like putting prices in videos like that because that won't hold. A month from now, you won't be able to find those. They'll be gone. Now, it's entirely possible that the RX 560s will have the same thing happen to them. You'll get mail-in rebates. They're $99 with a $20 mail-in rebate. What they're trying to do is clear out old inventory. Likewise, I fully expect the RX 550s to not stay at $79. Now, my crystal ball is fuzzy. I don't have a magic 8-ball that tells me what's going to happen. But what I will say is I fully expect that within a few months, the RX 550 will drop in price to the maybe $59 to $69 price range. Why? Just based upon its performance. As the R7 240s and 250s go away, which are about $55, as the GT 710s and 730s go away when we get the replacements for those from NVIDIA, these are going to become the new $50 to $70 graphics cards. This is launching at $79. Don't be surprised if you find it with a mail-in rebate or some other promo code at times for less than that, simply because for the performance, maybe $60 to $70 is probably the right price for this card. Moving on from pricing, look at our graphics card usage, pegged at 100%. That's because we are actually using our graphics card. We're at high detail. Look at our frame rate, 60 frames per second. Now, the reason why the frame rate wasn't much higher than 120 frames per second is because the game is locked to 120 frames. When you see the chart here in a minute between the integrated graphics and the RX 550, keep in mind at low detail, we're actually CPU limited. The game won't run faster than 120 frames per second. Here, we're GPU limited, which is why it is pegged to 100%. Now look at the temperature of the graphics card, 69 degrees. Keep in mind, this is a small card with a very basic fan on it. There are going to be all kinds of versions of this card, half height, full height, double thick, single slot thickness. The more cooler that the card has, the cooler it will run, no pun intended. So this particular card, if you saw it sitting on the desk a second ago, has a relatively basic cooler and fan on it. If you want a card that runs at a lower temperature with maybe a lower fan noise, you can certainly buy a different card that has a larger cooler. Speaking of fan noise, when I played and recorded these games, the computer was sitting on the desk next to me and the monitor, and frankly, the graphics card is the quietest thing in there. Don't fret about the fan noise. These things are incredibly silent, and the temperature's fine too. That's completely reasonable for something like this. VRAM usage, look at this, we're at 1.2 gigabytes. This card comes in a 2 and a 4 gigabyte version. Now I am testing the 4 gig version because that is what AMD sent me. I do not recommend the 4 gig version. There's no need whatsoever to buy an RX 550 with 4 gigabytes of VRAM. You might ask, well then great, why does the 4 gig version exist? Marketing. It's the same reason an 8 gig version of the RX 570 exists. It's the same reason a 4 gig version of the RX 460 exists. Marketing. Lots of people see a larger number, they see more VRAM, and all they can think of is a larger number must mean it's faster, and so more gigabytes means more speed somehow. No, you mostly need VRAM for textures, for higher resolutions and higher texture memory. Now that's all the world of tanks footage, and I actually ended up talking straight through that, go figure. Now here we are on Overwatch on the HD 630. Now we are at 1080p resolution, but please note that we're at 50% render resolution, so effectively it's 720p even though it's being output at 1080p. Why 50% render resolution? This game is unplayable at 1080p at low detail at 100% render resolution. I mean, it's a slideshow, literally. It's completely unplayable on integrated graphics without turning it down to either 720p resolution or the 50% render resolution, which does basically the same thing. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see we have basically 100% graphics card usage. We are stressed to the max. Our CPU is also fairly stressed. We're using 3 of our 4 cores. We're getting up to about 75%. Now, just to be clear, I mentioned this earlier only briefly. 4 cores, 100% divided by 4 is 25%. Each 25% of the CPU, in general, there are exceptions, but in general, means you're using 1 core. So 50% usage is 2 cores, 75% usage is 3 cores, and so on. Now, the temperature is very respectable. I love how cool some of these modern Intel chips run. At least the locked processors running at a modest 3.5 gigahertz. The overclocked i7s can get very hot, but these run very cool on basic coolers. Main system RAM usage, no big deal, less than 5 gigabytes. Now, I highly encourage everyone to upgrade their systems to 16 gigs because I find that Windows does make use of it. It makes multitasking smoother, it makes gaming smooth, everything just gets a little bit smoother. That being said, if you are considering a graphics card such as this, fair enough, you don't have to upgrade your RAM. All these games that are built for this card will run fine in 8 gigs of RAM. You don't need to upgrade it if you're buying an RX 550. Take a look at our real-time frame rate. We're getting almost 60 frames per second. That's not bad, actually. Considering that this is integrated graphics, that's respectable. However, this is sort of the latest and greatest integrated graphics. This is Kaby Lake. If you have a 4th, 3rd, or 2nd gen Intel chip with the HD 4000 series graphics, you're not going to get anything close to this. The integrated graphics from Intel have improved dramatically in the past few years. That being said, they're still pretty abysmal, all things considered, and frankly, a basic graphics card makes a big difference, as I'm going to show you here in just a second. So that's enough of the integrated graphics. Here is the RX 550. I'm showing you the detail settings again so that you know everything was set to exactly the same settings, and I did actually manually turn texture detail down to low. Even when you select the low preset on the details, it knows you've got enough VRAM to handle higher textures. Higher textures do not necessarily sap your performance, they sap your VRAM. Now, if you look at the VRAM usage, we're less than 1 gigabyte. If it was on high texture detail, it would be much more. I'm going to show you high here in just a second. But this is an important point because it's the shaders, the polygons, the lighting effects, that's what kills your frame rate. The other thing is with the VRAM, if you have enough VRAM, you can have higher quality textures. If you don't have enough VRAM, that's when you run into stutter and frame pacing issues. But with more VRAM, you can certainly crank up the texture detail with virtually, not always, but virtually no loss of performance. Now, speaking of performance, look at our frame rate. We are touching 200 frames per second on a $79 graphics card. Why? Low detail. It's kind of silly and overkill. Notice with our frame rate, our CPU usage is nearly pegged out and maxed. Generally higher frame rates, to a point, so long as you have enough graphics card, are CPU limited, not GPU limited. Anytime somebody asks a question about bottlenecks, it's never as simple as will X card bottleneck Y CPU. Look at this, our graphics chip is not being fully utilized. We're pegging down, we just touched 33%, then 50%, there's 61%. Our graphics card is bored, 8%. Our CPU is fully occupied. In the previous test, we were graphics card limited and the CPU is running at 65 to 75%. Now our CPU is maxed but our graphics card is bored. And this is why I'm showing you both low and high detail. I want you to pay attention to the CPU usage here, and then in a second when I switch it to high detail, you'll see the difference between low and high in CPU usage, and you'll see that the GPU pegged down. This is why MSI Afterburner is such a handy tool, and this is why charts of benchmark results don't tell the tale. There are lots of sources out there, both websites and YouTube videos, that are 3 to 5 minutes long, that throw up some charts that say, here's the performance numbers, it's great, it's not, have fun. But it doesn't tell you what you need. Do you need more graphics card? Are you limited by your CPU? Is it smooth and playable? What are the temperatures? What's our RAM usage like? These are the kind of things you can only see from live gameplay video, which is why I do it this way. I know a lot of people don't, but I actually believe in this pretty strongly, which is why I do these. It makes the video long, but it's informative, and I hope if you are serious about making an investment that potentially is a lot of money to you, because hey, whether you buy a $70 graphics card or a $700 graphics card, it's probably a decent investment for you, and you want to get value for your money. You want to get a tech deal. Now we're doing high detail, and I'm going to show you what the settings look like here in just a second. What you will notice is that our CPU usage is dramatically lower than it was before, but our GPU usage is pegged at 100%. So your graphics detail often determines whether or not you are bottlenecking your CPU or your GPU. Essentially, one is going to be the limiter to performance. This topic really deserves its own video, and I need to note that I need to make a video of bottlenecking. What does that mean? Because I see question after question after question in the comment section. Will GTX 1070 be bottlenecked by X CPU? Will an i5 whatever bottleneck X GPU? Yes, no, maybe. What are you doing? What game are you playing? What resolution? What detail? You cannot simply say X will bottleneck Y, because it depends upon too many things. In this particular situation, we were completely CPU limited when we were running at low detail. Now we're completely GPU limited. So in the middle run on the RX 550, the i5 7400 was actually bottlenecking our $79 graphics card. Here, our $79 graphics card is bottlenecking our CPU. So it totally depends, resolution, detail, game, situation, as to what is blocking what. But ultimately, something is always going to be limiting your performance. It might be your graphics card, it might be your CPU, it might be the game engine. World of Tanks, for example, isn't running over 120 frames per second no matter what you do, because that's just how it's programmed. World of Warships runs at 75 max no matter what you do. Fallout 4 runs at 60 no matter what you do. This game is actually limited to 300. If you look at the custom frame rate limiter setting, 300 is as far as the slider goes. So once you hit 300 frames per second, if we had a super fast CPU, then that becomes the limit. In any case, coming back to this game itself, look at our VRAM usage compared to the less than 1 gigabyte when we were at low detail. Now we're at about 1.5 gigabytes. So that is the increased texture usage from being at high texture details, as well as the other details. This is why for esports gaming and casual gaming at 1080p, a 2 gigabyte card is plenty. None of these games are meant to use more than 2 gigs because they're meant to run on all kinds of computers. They make them to be widely supported and available for all kinds of people. Look at our main system RAM usage. Again, 8 gigabytes is enough. If you watch my other videos, you know I'm a big supporter of 16 gigs of RAM. This is the exception. If you're buying a basic i5 machine to play games such as this with this card, you don't need 16 gigs. It's nice, but you don't. And then you can see our frame rate is running at a nice, comfortable 60 frames per second. Now that's enough Overwatch play. I would love to actually show you the rest of this run because this was an epic win. I lose as many as I win, if not more, but frankly this battle was really cool, right down to the wire, and a lot of fun. But now we're going to move on to Grand Theft Auto 5. Now, Grand Theft Auto 5 is not really meant for this card, but I want to show you what happens when you try to run AAA games on a $79 graphics card. You would be far, far, far better off getting the RX 560 or even 460 if you want to play Grand Theft Auto 5, and it is relatively tolerant of modest graphics. We are now running on the integrated graphics, the HD 630, but we are at 720p. Notice how large the green numbers from MSI Afterburner are. That is because I did not change the scaling. This makes it clear, obvious, and apparent that the resolution is changed. You can actually adjust the size of that font. I could make it look like the same size as before, but I left it big just to make it clear and obvious this is 720p. Everything is basically set as far down as, well, I showed it to you at the beginning. Normal detail, which is the minimum it goes to. You have normal, high, and very high, and a few of them go to ultra. So we're at the lowest detail level, lowest distance sliders, lowest population density, lowest population variety. Everything is cranked to the bottom, and we're at 720p. Notice that our graphics chip, our integrated graphics, is completely pegged out to the max. VRAM usage is quite reasonable considering everything's down to the minimum, and our CPU is basically using, well, almost 3 cores there. Main system RAM usage, take a look at this. AAA games, 16 gigs of RAM. We're using over 8 gigs of RAM. This would not run this smoothly on 8 gigs of RAM. You need 16 gigs for Grand Theft Auto, but you don't need it. The game's smoother on 16 gigs. Not faster, smoother. It's an important point. Look at our frame rate. Dreadful. Well, it's playable. I mean, okay, we're at 46, 45 frames per second. There was a lot of input lag here. This was controllable. It's playable. It's not great. Would I want to play this on any amount of regular time on this setup with an integrated graphics chip? No, it's doable. If you want to play games such as Grand Theft Auto 5, Rise of the Tomb Raider, The Witcher 3, and you want to play them and you don't have money for a dedicated graphics card, frankly, that's what PlayStations and Xboxes are for. I hate to recommend those, but the reality is integrated graphics is dreadful for these kind of games. But I'm showing it to you because I want to show you the difference between integrated graphics and this RX 550 on a AAA gaming title. Granted, one that is a year and a half old on the PC, 3 years old on the console, but a year and a half old on the PC. But still, very nice, a lot of fun, and let's go take a look at this on the RX card. As a complete side note, I actually did record far more gameplay than what you just watched there. I don't find a 3 or 5 minute run of random gameplay to be sufficient in order to get a minimum, maximum, and average that is reflective. I've done it in the past and I've discovered it's very variable. You've got to play Grand Theft Auto 5 for 15 to 20 minutes, driving around doing various things in order to smooth out the numbers. I used to do 3 separate 3 to 5 minute runs, and then I discovered the numbers simply weren't consistent. Then one day, I tried 3 different 15-minute runs and found they were far closer together. You do have to repeat these tests multiple times. I have more than a dozen hours of work into this one video you're watching. It takes a lot of time just to test 3 games at different settings with and without a graphics card at different resolutions, and then to repeat the test to make sure that you get similar results. They're not going to always be exactly the same results because you are in fact doing random things. I'm not running GTA 5's built-in benchmark, which I actually don't like very much. I don't find it reflective of the game itself. The purpose of my gameplay videos is to say, will this game run on this hardware? The value and use of a built-in benchmark is not to tell you if the game will run. It's to compare different hardware. Now, we are comparing different hardware, integrated graphics to this, but the benchmark won't tell you, will this RX 550 play Grand Theft Auto 5? Playing the game will. Now, our detail settings here are the exact same as they were when we were running on integrated graphics. I want you to notice 2 things. First, our frame rate is hitting 120 plus frames per second, and number 2, we're CPU limited again, just like the previous run in Overwatch. This just goes to show you that you can limit yourself to CPU or GPU depending upon settings in many games. Watch that graphics chip. We're at 60%, 76%, 51%. A faster graphics card wouldn't run this game any faster because we are limited by the performance of the i5-7400. If you want to play games at 150 to 250 frames per second, what you need is a ton of CPU power. Now, you need graphics power, but you need tons of CPU power. And while I generally recommend the new Ryzen 5 1600 to most people for gaming, over 100 frames per second, I would absolutely make an argument for an i7-7700K overclocked to 4.7 to 5 gigahertz on liquid cooling, because if you want to run at 150 to 200 frames a second, if you have a high refresh rate monitor and you want those to be your minimums, yeah, frankly, clock speed and high-end processors, I would buy an i7-7700K if that was my goal. Now, I don't. I play on 60 hertz monitors. And since I play at 4K at 60 hertz, what I need is graphics card, not CPU. So I play on Ryzen and get the smoothest experience in the world. It's lovely. So they each have their place. Now, all that being said, you're not going to buy an RX 550 to play at 720p. At least I hope not. Here's 1080p, and we're back on the HD 630. I'll make this short. I know the video is running long, but I want to show you just how bad the performance on integrated graphics is when you try to play games such as GTA 5 at 1080p. And this also serves the benefit of providing an HD 630 benchmark at 1080p in GTA 5, which I don't know if I've done yet or not. But in any case, if I have, well, here's another one. Take a look at our frame rate, 23 frames per second. Yeah, this is abysmal. I'm going to cut this out here in just a minute. I actually tried playing for 15 minutes, and I think I only made about 11 minutes I played. It's horrible. It's not just the frame rate. The input lag is terrible. There's times where the card doesn't respond for a full second or two when you press like the WASD keys to make the car drive. Nothing happens and then it does. This is completely unplayable in all respects. I just want to show you about a minute of footage just so you can see the frame rate, and yeah, it's not there. Don't even bother. You can absolutely play, other games such as League of Legends at 1080p on integrated graphics, but this is terrible. There are times this dips down into next to nothing frame rate. So, enough of that. What about the RX 550 at 1080p? I did say that would be short, did I not? Here we are at 1080p on the RX 550. Same detail settings, low, or well, normal in this case, but I'm not changing the details. All the runs, 720p and 1080p here so far, have been at normal. I'm going to show you high here in a second so that you can see what you can get on a $79 graphics card at high detail in GTA 5. It's not as bad as you'd think, although the performance is great at normal detail. Look at this. We're getting... Oh, ouch! Oh, that's going to affect the resale value of that car. Thankfully, it's not mine. Here, I'll just knock the train off the track. I'm sure this car will do that perfectly. Watch. Oh! He didn't even slow down. Our graphics chip is fully occupied and we're getting about 100 frames per second. Not bad for a $79 graphics card. Main system RAM usage is just under 8 gigabytes, although this is a fresh start run. Keep in mind that GTA 5 does memory leak a little bit. The longer you play, the larger the main system RAM usage goes. Look at our VRAM usage, 2.8 gigabytes. We're at 2.8 gigabytes at essentially the lowest possible detail level. So while I've said, just get the 2 gig card, just get the 2 gig card, well, that's because I don't expect you to actually play GTA 5 on this. Okay, if you're going to play GTA 5, get the 4 gig card. But if you're going to do that, get the 460 or 560, not the 550. The price difference isn't that big, but I'm including this because everybody is going to ask in the comments, what about AAA titles? Why didn't you test something more advanced? We know Overwatch plays fine. Here's GTA 5. Now, this isn't normal. High is still quite respectable, all things considered. Ow, I cannot drive to save my life today now, can I? Well, the desert's boring, so we're going to cut to something more fun here. Same settings, everything's the same. I didn't transition to high, but I just cut later into the test. I did play this for about 20 minutes or so, just to drive to a different part of the city. I was resurrected out in the countryside, and it wasn't very interesting. So here I am on the freeway, blowing stuff up, having some fun. To be honest, I do sometimes do these longer than I should because it's fun to just drive around and create mayhem. What can I say? I do it in the game, not real life. Don't worry. I'm quite boring in real life. I'm married with 3 kids. What can I say? Another quick cut just to something fun. We're still at normal detail. Nothing's changed. See our frame rate up there. But you'll notice that the main system RAM usage is slowly going up. I'm only cutting a minute or two out of each section here. But I just want you to see that the main system RAM usage is going up and... Oh, that guy just rear-ended me. That's not very nice. You'd think I was wanted or something. Apparently that happens if you shoot their... Oh, that's pro skills. And I didn't need that fender. Would you get out from underneath? I am not a whatever you think I am. Hey, let's go over to the prison. They'll never find me over here. This was way too much fun. Okay, fine. High detail. You twisted my arm. What can I say? Now, I honestly thought I put the settings onto video. I usually do. I didn't. I'm sorry. Take my word for it. This is high detail. Full screen anti-aliasing on. Every setting is set to high. Shadows are switched from sharp to soft. But that's what this is. This is high detail at 1080p. And looking at the frame rate, it should be obvious because we're at 55, 57 frames per second. VRAM usage is not substantially different, which I find interesting. It is if you go to very high texture detail, but at high detail, it's not substantially different. You'll also notice that our CPU usage has dropped a bit, while our graphics card is generally pegged at 100% most of the time, or 99, 98% thereabouts. Now, this is not going to be 100 frames per second, but here's what I find impressive. GTA 5 is a beautiful open world game, and while it's not new, it's only about a year and a half old, it is a large environment and world to drive around in. There's a wide variety of cars and pedestrians and buildings and sights to see, and we are getting 60 frames per second on a $79 graphics card. Well, I say $79 graphics card. Let me put a caveat in here. This is the 4GB version of the card. Look at our VRAM usage. Fair enough. I actually don't know what the 4GB versions of these cards will cost. They did not provide me with that pricing information prior to launch, and I'm recording this prior to launch, so all I know is the starting price of $79, which was provided to me by AMD. So yeah, with a 2GB card, you will have texture RAM issues well, frankly, at any detail. This game really wants 3GB of VRAM at 1080p. Completely random side note, this car has incredible off-road performance. I would like to know where I can go get a sporty car such as, and it's drivable. Cars in this world are really well built. This is a cool shot. Hang on, we're gonna go for a little bit of a journey here, and hole in one. Do I stick it? Yep. Unfortunately, the car is stuck up here now, but who cares? Just for fun, I trimmed a bunch of footage out of there. The sun is starting to set. This was, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes or so into playing, give or take. You can see here that we're back in the city now. I've obviously beat up all those cops and we're driving around. I just want to include some more for fun because I just love this game entirely too much. The irony is I've never finished the storyline. I do have two of the characters. I do have Michael, and I've advanced the storyline partway, and then to be honest, I got bored and decided to that's gonna hurt. Well, good thing this car has airbags. Shall we try that again? Yep, stunt jump failed, but I hit the bike that I ran the guy over earlier. Oh well, no loss. Let's see if we can do this again. And airborne. Boy, that car has seen better days. And this impact might sting a little bit. Hopefully, we have two sets of airbags because we didn't have time to replace the first set. That is one tough car, and it's still drivable. I don't think I could do that in real life. Watch how fast you get going in the city streets on a car that just took that level of... and we're still driving. They don't build them like they used to. The question is, do they build me like they used to? Do I have my seatbelt on? Nope. I did not put my seatbelt on, and I ran fresh out of airbags. Don't worry, I'll just get up and keep running. Excuse me, kind sir, you don't need that truck anymore, do you? I'll just borrow it. Yep, thank you, sir. Truck in hand, bonus points if any of you can tell where we're going. Yeah, let's go have some. This will only take a minute, don't worry, then we'll get to the slides and the charts and the numbers and all the fun, boring benchmarks. But for now, we're going to borrow something. Yes, for those of you living in the Los Angeles area, you will recognize that building there. This is supposed to be Los Angeles International Airport. Well, it was before we ran over that poor guy. Oh, well, there's more where he came from. Let's just run through here and see what we can find, shall we? What could we find at an airport that could be fun? An airplane? No, I don't know how to fly. Flying airplanes is complicated and takes years of training. To heck with it. We'll just wing it, shall we? Yeah, I'm bad, I know. Oh, and I even crashed into the engine and the plane doesn't care. But let's go take this thing for a spin. There is sometimes a 747 sitting here, and then you can see the private jet next to it as well, both of which you can steal. Pretty straightforward. Run up to it, press F to hop into it, and away you go. Excuse me, control tower, sorry, you do not have clearance to take off. The runway is not clear. There are vehicles on the runway. All right, I won't use the runway to take off. No worries. See the vehicles there on the left? Yep, I avoided them. Don't worry. You didn't say anything about taking off from the grass in the taxiway now, did you? You know what we meant. We didn't clear you to take off. I just stole a 747. Do you really care whether I had takeoff clearance? I'm bad, I know. Not that I want to end up on any watch lists or anything, but just for fun, what happens when you take a 747 and see whether or not it's still useful? What are we going to do here? Anybody want to place a bet? Yep, I'm sure this will work, just like real life. Maybe? Yes? Wow, they have armored these buildings, haven't they? Okay, enough nonsense. Let's take a look at the results. And here we are at the first result, World of Tanks 1080p 3 tests. I tested both the integrated graphics as well as the RX 550 on low and then the RX 550 on high. Please note the game will not run on medium or high on integrated graphics whatsoever. It's a slideshow. Notice that the frame rate between integrated graphics and the RX 550 are virtually identical. That's because we were CPU limited and game engine limited because the game runs at max 120 frames per second. If that weren't the case, we'd see more on the RX 550 on low. So what's interesting is this shows the value of integrated graphics. Take a look at high. We averaged exactly 60 frames per second on the RX 550. That's pretty cool. So if you want to play at high detail and maybe even record your gameplay or live stream it, a $79 RX 550 2GB card will play World of Tanks 1080p high detail 60 frames per second without an issue. How about Overwatch? Overwatch 1080p 50% render resolution low detail. We averaged 56 frames per second on integrated graphics. We averaged 128 frames per second on the RX 550. That is more than double. Look at the minimum frame rate. That's almost triple. Now the maximum's incredible, but forget the maximum for a minute. Minimum frame rates nearly tripled at the same detail settings. How about high detail 100% render resolution, effectively full 1080p? Minimums were better at high on the RX 550 than they were on low at effectively 720p on the HD 630. This just goes to show you how much performance this really has compared to that HD 630. We got 66 frames per second average performance at high detail at 100% render resolution. I can tell you that at medium detail, if you want to compromise in the middle, medium detail 100% render will get you closer to 90 frames per second on the RX 550. It's really all you need to play Overwatch at 1080p resolution. Next up, we have Grand Theft Auto 5. This slide's a little more complicated because I actually had 5 different tests and runs. Look at the first two first. Those were at 720p. Now, I don't really recommend playing this at 720p, but hey, if you're using integrated graphics, you have to. 41 frames per second average, 28 minimum on the HD 630. On the RX 550, where we were actually CPU limited, we got 116 frames per second. Triple the performance, roughly, of the integrated graphics. That's pretty good. Integrated graphics coming down to the 1080p, worthless, completely unplayable on integrated graphics at 1080p at the lowest possible detail, minimum of 13 frames a second, horrible input lag, useless. What about on the RX 550? Notice how little performance difference there was between the two resolutions on the RX 550. 107 frames per second average with a minimum of 76 at normal detail. That is perfection. That is perfect, absolute, solid 60 frame per second playable frame rates. No issues whatsoever. What if we set the detail to high? An average of 56 frames per second. Now, it's not perfection, and the minimum did dip down to 36, probably when I crashed into the building, but it was very, very playable. Would I play Grand Theft Auto 5 at high detail on an RX 550 at 1080p? Yes. Would I maybe move a couple of those settings, maybe shadows back to sharp, maybe tessellization back down a setting or two? Yes, make 1 or 2 minor adjustments to those settings and you'll get over 60 frames per second average without a problem. That being said, I still strongly recommend an RX 460 or an RX 560 when they come out in May for games like Grand Theft Auto 5. An RX 460 will play Grand Theft Auto 5 at high detail, closer to 90 frames per second. It's much, much better experience overall. But you do need a 4GB card for all the texture memory, so that's just something to think about as well. And there you have all the results of the 3 games that I tested on this Acer Aspire T computer, which I have previously reviewed, linked in the video description below. This card works perfectly in there without any issues whatsoever. Now, you certainly can install a more powerful graphics card, but if the games that I've talked about today are all that you have any interest in playing, there really is no need to spend more money if you don't want to. $450 for a brand new 7th generation pre-built machine, less than $100 for this graphics card gives you a great value for the money. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with that big huge red button directly below. Questions and comments in the comment section. And as always, check out the video description. Links to everything I've talked about in this video will be down there. Links to this graphics card on both Amazon and Newegg will be down there. Links to this computer, which I bought myself, Acer did not send this to me, will also be down there on Amazon. It is a great deal for the money. For the price and the performance in here, I highly recommend it if you're looking for a basic quad-core machine, either for gaming or non-gaming purposes. In any case, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video.